Hi, this is Bill Hitchcock, and I'm going to show you how to set up a contact database in Microsoft Access. On the screen right here, what I've got is I started up Microsoft Access. So I'm going to go to a blank desktop database, and then I want to choose where I'm going to save this and give it a file name and do some of that. So I'm going to click on the little folder here, put this to where you can save it on your C drive. I'm going to save this on my Google Drive here. Oh, never mind. I'm going to put this on my OneDrive in my CIT 110 Basics class. And we'll put this in just a folder. Right, so anyways, I'm going to give it a file name, and the important thing is we say something like contacts, and we can save it as a type of 2007 2013 databases. That's the default file type that I have on this version of Access. So I'm going to hit OK, click on Create, and as soon as I do that, it automatically puts me into a table. Now, in relational database management systems like Access and other ones, there's kind of four main things that you have to work with, four main objects. The most important one is a table, and that's where you store all the data. It's the content, and you also store what's known as the metadata, or the data about the data. In other words, the fields that I'm going to set up, all the properties of those fields, the names of them, what data types they are, if they're text, and all of that. That's all metadata. So when I set up a table, kind of the initial screen is that it's got it in what they refer to as datasheet view. It looks basically like a spreadsheet. I've got a bunch of cells here that I can start typing in. So I'm going to switch that view to design view because I want to set up the metadata first. And as soon as I make that switch, it prompts me to save the table. So in this particular database, I'm going to have three different tables. I'm going to have one for the US states, I'm going to have one for zip codes, and then I'm going to have one for our addresses or our contacts. So I'm going to call this the state table and hit OK. And now I'm going to start setting up my fields. So Access assumes that you're going to have some sort of a unique identifier on each one of the records in your table. So it does a couple things. One is it automatically assigns a primary key, which is that unique identifier. Something, think of it like a social security number for a person. Something that uniquely identifies you. So in this case, for the state table, I'm going to change that. I don't want it to just assign an auto number to it. I want to make this my state code, and when I come up with field names, I usually use what they call camel case, where you do an lowercase first character, and then any word that comes after that you always do uppercase for that, hence the idea of a hump or a capital letter for each of those. So I've got the state code. I'm going to change the data type to one of, there's probably 12 different data types. We're going to change this to short text. Short text gives you anywhere from 1 character to 255. It's power of 2. Everything's in computers is binary, so it's 2 to the 8th actually gives you 256. But if you think of it, it's really like 0 to 255, which is 256 characters. So all I need for the state code, that's like your state abbreviation, so a 2-character code. The caption, I'm just going to call this ST or maybe state. The caption will show up on all of our forms, reports, queries, and also when we're entering in the data. So it's always a good idea to include a caption. Other than that, that's really about it. So give it a field name, a data type, a size, and a caption. The next field is my state name. I'll make that again. Short text will be just fine. We'll make this 25 characters, and for the caption we'll make it state name. And then finally you can put in any other things that kind of every state has one of. So every state has a state capital, every state has a state tree, every state has a state flower, a state bird, some of those kinds of things. Actually, I guess every state doesn't have an official one, but most states do. Uh, States have governors, so if you wanted to update the governor every 4 years, you could do something like that. So I'm going to put in the state capital, and I'll again leave that short text. We can decide how big we want to make this. Maybe we'll try 30 characters in case there's some state, city that, or state capital is fairly long, and we'll just call this either just the capital, or again, if you want to make it state space capital, that will work just fine. And that's good. So let's change the view back to datasheet view. Prompts me to save the table. And I'm going to type in my first state. IA, state name is Iowa, capital is Des Moines. I could type in IL, Illinois, and Springfield, and we'll do WI, Wisconsin, Madison. So now that I've got that all done, again, this works pretty much like a spreadsheet. I can adjust the column widths here. Notice that my fields have state, state name, and capital. Those were the captions that I used. We'd want to alphabetize this normally by whatever the primary key field is. So in this case, it's state. And I've got my first table set up. So I can close that, save the changes, hit yes, and I've got a table created. All right, the next one that I want to create, so I'll go to create, set up a table, change the view to design view, and we'll make our zip code table. And for the zip code table, it's the primary key unique identifier is a zip code, a 5-digit zip code. So we'll make this the zip code. Now for the data type, I've got a couple different choices. I could make it a number data type, which would make sense because that way it will enforce that it's actually numeric. The only thing about numbers is sometimes to get the formatting just right, you have to decide how you want to handle that. Another option some people would use is short text, because with our zip codes, it's not like we're going to do any math on those numbers. So, I wouldn't sum up zip codes. I wouldn't get an average zip code or anything like that. But actually, I think on this one, just to show you a different type of field, because everything else was all short text, let's use a number format. And for a number data type, the field size, it gives me not a specific length, but it gives me different number types. So for example, there's something that's called a byte, which only takes up 1 byte worth of data. So since I've only got 1 byte, the highest number I could type in that is 255. So that's not very good for zip codes. Integer fields can contain just what it says, an integer, but it stores it, the values are anywhere from negative 32,768 to a positive 32,767. Again, it's based off numbers of bytes that you have and so on, number of bits to store that. So again, 32,767, that's not going to be big enough to handle a zip code, say 52001, which is 52,000 if you want to think of it that way. I could choose a long integer, which long integer supports numbers up into the billions, I believe. So that would be just fine. Some of the other ones that are listed there, single, double, decimal, and so on, those are for if you have decimal places in your numbers, which zip codes won't. So we're going to use a long integer. The caption, I'll make it the word zip code to space that out. And we'll go to our next field. The next field is the zip city, or the city name. So that being short text makes sense. City names, maybe we'll make these again 30 characters, and we'll just call this city. And then finally what we have is our zip state, the state that the zip code is part of. So there we'll start out for right now and just make this 2 characters. And notice that I'm going to match this up with my state table. So I want to start out making it the same exact field type as what we had for the primary key of our state table. For the caption, we'll call it state. And then for the description, we might want to say what this is related to. This is what we call, it will become what's known as an FK, a foreign key. It's linked to the primary key of the state table. So you can give it a little bit of description just to help somebody else that's doing some maintenance work on this database. They'll know what exactly it is that you're trying to do with this database. All right, well, let's go into view. Oops, I got to save this table first. And now I'm to datasheet view. The zip code is 52001. The city is Dubuque. And the state will be IA. And that seems to work just fine. All right, my next zip code, we'll make it 04330, which is Augusta, Maine. Now we've got 2 potential problems here. One is, if you notice the zip code, I typed in 04330, but it doesn't display it with that. So I'm going to need to change the format of that so it will display out a 0. The second thing is, I've got a state in here, Maine, that doesn't exist in my state table yet. So that's a potential problem. Well, let's adjust the widths. And we can sort this by our primary key. Go back to the view. And let's change our zip code. So for the zip code, they've got a format here. And I can click on that. And I want to say that this is a fixed format, for example. And we can adjust the decimal places, make sure that that's set to 0. And let's try this again. And in my view, it doesn't look like I'm getting the leading 0. So let's go back to design view, change my zip code, and try for the format instead of fixed. Let's try 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 zeros. And we'll save this. And when I do 5 zeros, it will automatically plug in any leading zeros that we'd have. Alright, one more thing to do now is I'm going to go into my zip table in design view, and I want to change this zip state. So when I come over for the data type, I'm going to do not short text, but I want to do lookup wizard. And with the wizard, we can look up our information in another table. So it says the wizard creates a lookup field, displays a list of values you can choose from. Do you want to do this from a table or a query, or do you want to type in the values? In general, you always want to set it up to do as a table. And the reason you do that is that way you can always modify that table and add or change the values that you'd allow. If you type in the values, it makes it really hard to go back and ever change those. So that's why I would kind of tell you, you know what, just set up a table. And it's a lot easier to handle it that way. Choose next. Then it prompts us which table or query do we want to provide the values from. I've just, in this case, got 2 tables here. I've got the state table and the zip code. I know it's the state table I want to look this up in, so I'll choose next. You can choose which fields we need. So I do need the primary key, the state code. I also want the state name. Really don't need the state capital for this, so I'll leave that off. Hit next. Prompts me to sort it. In general, it's always a good idea to sort this. And normally what you can do is just sort by the primary key. Because it's unique, you don't need to sort by anything else. Hit next. Now Access always wants to hide that key column, and the only time I would do that is if your primary key is an auto number. In other words, it just automatically goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That number doesn't really mean a whole lot other than it's just a unique identifier. But in this case, we have these codes that most people know what some of these state abbreviations are. So I'm going to narrow up these columns. But once you do that, for some reason, it always helps just to make them a little bit wider. So narrow them first, then just drag that back over. Hit next. When I select the row in the lookup field, I can store a value. Normally this is just whatever it says there. It's going to use the primary key. That's what we want to choose. So hit next. And the last screen of this lookup wizard, it gives us a couple of options to enable data integrity and allow multiple values. I would never check these things here because we can always do this later. This is a real important concept, this idea about enabling data integrity. What it means is when we have our zip codes, they have to belong to a state that already exists. So that's where we said we've got this problem in our database right now is we have Maine in there. We don't have that as one of our states. So that's why we don't want to check this here because we know that we've got a problem. Second thing is this multiple values. That's usually bad database design, so I would not choose multiple values here. There's always a better way to set up your database than to do this. So hit finish. It says the table's going to be saved before the relationships are going to be created. That's our key thing with a relational database management system is we have tables and relationships between them. So yes, that's what I want to do. Hit OK. And now let's try changing the view back. So when I come over to the city, that's fine. Now when I go to the state, it has this little drop down menu. So it lets me either choose a state or I can still type something in. I could type in LA for Louisiana or KS for Kansas and put that in there. Or I'll go back to Maine, which is where that is. So let's close this one up. And let's go to our state table. Let's add Maine into it. And let's see. I believe Augusta is the capital. And if you're not sure about what the capitals are, go to Google. And we can try searching for our list of state capitals. Find a link that's got them. Scroll through, so see if we can find them. There's Maine. I guessed right. It was Augusta. So we can enter in all of our state capitals and pull something like that. They also, it looks like they have a printer-friendly list, and we can take a look at this. And actually, this might be a useful page that we can use to import all this data, and that way we don't have to type in all of our states and pull that in ourselves. So, all right, let's go back to our database. I'll show you one or two more things, and then we'll close this one down. So if we go back to home, we've got database tools. And if I go in database tools to relationships, it shows you the two tables that I've added, and it's got this relationship between state and zip code. And there's an arrow that kind of connects those two things. All right. Now I'm going to double click on that line. And in this line, it lets me edit this relationship. So it's got an option for enforce referential integrity. That's something you want to check because that means that the zip codes that I have, they belong to states that really do exist. The next option is Cascade Update Relate Fields. I want to choose that because if for some reason I would change the state code, say Maine, it's not really ME, it's MA, for example, it will go through all of our zip codes and update those. The last one, the Cascade Delete Related Records, that one is kind of a, might not want to do that because the idea is If you delete out the state main, it will go through and delete every single zip code that belongs to it. And probably what you want to do is you'd want to change the state that those zip codes belong to first and then go ahead and delete the state. So normally I tell people don't check that one. Down at the bottom it says relationship is one to many, meaning one state has many zip codes. A zip code belongs to only one state. That's kind of the ideal that we want to have in our databases. So I'll hit OK, and if it works, I've got one to many, or in other words, an infinite number of zip codes. So that works well. The only bad thing about this is if you need to make a change to either one of those tables, especially the fields that are connected, you're going to have to come in here and delete out this relationship and then reestablish it later. So don't be in too much of a rush to set up all these relationships. Get your table set up right first, and then you can go in and do some of this work. So I'm going to close this up, save that, and that's enough for this particular clip.